Here is a story that lasts 16 years told by a spy from Italy to his son on Christmas night. Rome, December 24, 2007, 8:32 p.m. There were no presents under the tree, only a glass of grappa, a bottle of wine and a gun hidden under my coat. And it was not one of those toy guns you get from the Easter eggs. It was real. It had been real since 1995 when I joined the ISMI, the military intelligence service of the Italian Defense Ministry. I remember that night like it was yesterday because it was the first night I left my little Niccolo alone. I'm sure he was having nightmares about me dying. He was 6 years old, and the thought of leaving him alone for the first time filled me with sadness. But duty is duty. If I didn't go to Madrid, someone else would, and they might not come back at all. The mission was important. I was to meet a Spanish drug lord named El Gato. My cover was that of an art dealer, a man who collects statues from Asia and Africa. In reality, I was there to buy information, to understand if the cartels were involved in trafficking or just using the route to move their product. I spent 3 months in Madrid. It was March when I left. I remember because Niccolo was celebrating his birthday. I arrived home in the evening and he threw himself into my arms. The missions were always secret and dangerous, but when you come back to him, it makes it all worthwhile. He reminded me of my father. May he rest in peace. There are some things you don't forget. Like the smell of freshly cut grass or your first kiss. For me, it was the day I met Niccolo for the first time. His mother was expecting our second child. She was pregnant with Isabella and miscarried soon after she saw me leave. I cried for weeks. But fate had its own plans, and my wife decided to give me another chance. 5 more years of marriage and 2 more beautiful children. And then, boom, it all ended on a winter night in Barcelona. I was chasing a lead on a possible terrorist threat. I managed to infiltrate a group of North African men. They seemed harmless. A bunch of street vendors trying to make a quick buck. But looks can be deceiving. On that night of December, we followed them to an abandoned warehouse. I stayed hidden until they all left. Then I entered cautiously. It looked like any other abandoned warehouse from the outside, but inside it was a hornet's nest of jihadists. There must have been at least 30 of them. And in the middle, they had set up a torture rack. I couldn't believe my eyes. What was this place? What were they doing here? I had to get out. I made it to the door without being seen, but as I opened it, I heard a voice, "Freeze." I turned around and saw a burly man with a Kalashnikov pointed at me. I raised my hands in surrender. He ordered me to lie down on the floor. I did so thinking he would shoot me dead. Instead, he asked me questions about who I was, what I was doing there. When I told him I was a reporter, he seemed satisfied with the answer. "A reporter," he said. "You are lucky tonight. We don't kill reporters. Not tonight anyway." He stood there for a few seconds looking at me. "Get out of here and don't come back," he said. I nodded my head and crawled out of the building. I didn't dare look back. Once outside, I ran to safety. When I got home, I threw myself into my wife's arms. She was scared out of her wits. We never spoke of that night again. But I could see the fear in her eyes every time I left the house. It was the same fear I saw in Niccolo's eyes when he bid me goodbye before I left for my next mission. This time I was heading to Valladolid. My mission was simple: observe and report on a local politician with ties to the Russian mafia. 3 weeks passed and I was starting to think the mission would be uneventful when suddenly I was summoned back to Rome. "Urgent mission," they said. No time to explain. The next thing I knew, I was on a plane to New York. It was September 11, 2008. And I wasn't there to do some sightseeing. I was at John F. Kennedy International Airport to pick up a mysterious package. All I knew was that it contained evidence against a high-ranking member of the Italian parliament, someone involved in shady deals with the Russians. I took the package to a safe house in Brooklyn where an agent was waiting for me. The package was a hard drive containing sensitive information. I delivered it to the FBI and returned to Italy. I was enjoying a quiet moment at home when my phone rang. It was my boss. "We have a situation. You need to get to Florence right away." I found out that the politician I was tailing had been kidnapped. His name was Bruno Beatrice. Now the Italians weren't involved in his disappearance. It was most likely the Russians who did it. My job was to follow Beatrice's wife and make sure she was safe. Easy enough. I arrived in Florence and set up surveillance. I followed her everywhere, to the shops, to the park, even to her solarium. She was a beautiful woman in her late 40s with long flowing hair and expensive taste. I admired her from afar, knowing I couldn't get too close. My job was just to watch over her. Then one night she vanished. I informed my superiors. They increased my pay and gave me a new assignment: find Mrs. Beatrice and bring her back to Florence. Simple enough. I searched everywhere but couldn't find her. Just when I was about to give up, I spotted her entering a small cafe near the Ponte Vecchio. I followed her in and introduced myself. She looked at me suspiciously. "Are you here to bargain for my husband's release?" she asked. "No, I'm here to protect you," I lied. She smiled sadly. "You are too late. I already have a buyer for my husband." She reached into her purse and pulled out a photograph. It was Bruno beaten and bloodied. "He is no longer useful to them," she said. "But I am. And you can help me escape." I played along. "How?" she asked. "Let me buy you a drink," I said. She agreed, and we left the cafe. As we walked along the Arno River, I pretended to be a lost tourist. She played along perfectly, giving me directions to the train station. At the right moment, I made my move. I grabbed her arm and pulled her into a dark alley. "Help me," she cried. "What are you doing?" I whispered. "Shh," I said. "Just trust me." I led her to a car I had parked nearby and bundled her inside. I drove her out of town. As dawn broke, I stopped at a gas station and helped her out of the car. "Where are we?" she asked. "You are safe now," I said. "That's all that matters." We were both shaken by the events of the night before. We talked for hours, sharing stories and laughter. I learned that she was an intelligent, strong-willed woman who had never backed down from a challenge. I liked her a lot. Suddenly, I found myself falling in love with her. As the sun began to set, I drove her back to Florence. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" I asked. "For everything," she replied. "Goodbye." She stepped out of the car and disappeared into the crowd. I watched her go, my heart heavy with sadness. I never saw her again. Years passed and I kept moving from city to city, carrying out my missions, never forgetting the woman from Florence. Then one day, I got a call from my boss. A new assignment. Get to Venice and meet a contact. No other details. I arrived in Venice and checked into a small hotel near the Grand Canal. That night, I went for a walk along the Zatter Promenade. The water was still and the sky was filled with stars. I sat down on a bench to take it all in when suddenly I heard a familiar laugh. I turned my head and saw her. The woman from Florence. She was with a handsome man. Time seemed to stop. I couldn't believe my luck. Here was the woman I had fallen in love with years ago, right in front of me. I wanted to approach her, but I was afraid she wouldn't remember me. Afraid that she would laugh in my face. So, I sat there on the bench watching her, hoping for a miracle. And then it happened. She saw me. Her eyes widened in surprise. "Marco," she whispered. The handsome stranger looked at me questioningly, but she ignored him. "I can't believe it's really you," she said. We spent the night talking and laughing, just like old times. I learned that she was still married, but her husband was a distant man who cared more about business than her. They had been living separately for years. I didn't tell her I was a spy. I didn't want to scare her away. I just played along, pretending to be a regular guy. As the first rays of sunlight touched the water, we said goodbye. I knew I had to leave. I had a mission to complete. I promised myself I would come back and see her again. And I did. Every time I was in Venice, I would meet her by the Rio de San Polo. We fell deeply in love. And one day I told her about my work. She understood and supported me, never asking questions. One evening, we were walking along the banks of the Grand Canal when I suddenly stopped. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Look," I said, pointing to a small boat floating past us. She followed my gaze and gasped. "Quick, hide behind this pillar," I whispered. I pulled her close as the boat approached. Two men in dark clothing were sitting inside. I recognized them from my handler's description. They were from the Russian mob. "Why are they looking for me?" she asked. "I don't know," I replied. "But I won't let them hurt you." I pulled her into a tight embrace, feeling her trembling body against mine. We stayed there for what seemed like hours, listening to the sounds of the city around us. When we finally emerged from our hiding place, the men were gone. I knew I had to leave Venice. I was in too deep. Saying goodbye to her was the hardest thing I've ever done. "I love you," she whispered. "I know," I replied. And with that, I was gone.